Well, welcome to Heritage Village's Author Talk series. This is one that we're doing with Peter Kageyama, and we are going to talk to him about his book, For the Love of Cities Revisited. This is in partnership with St. Petersburg Press. We're really happy to work with that organization, producing wonderful pieces of literature and working with local authors to really put out some fantastic stuff. So thank you so much for being here, Peter.
My pleasure. Good to see you, Monica.
Thank you. Well, we'll just get right into it, and hopefully my computer won't be slow and my slide will advance here. There we go. So For the Love of Cities Revisited, talk a little bit, Peter, about the premise of this book and explain how you have revisited the main premise.
Sure. So the first version, For the Love of Cities, came out in early 2011. And the central idea was asking the question, talking about, do you love your city and why should that matter? There. And I think it struck a nerve. 2011, we were coming out of the economic recession. People had this energy and this newfound sort of commitment and love for their places, and it was manifesting in some really interesting ways. And I feel like I was lucky enough to sort of document that and to talk about those people who were not the official folks, not mayors or council people or city managers and folks like that, but a lot of times ordinary citizens, entrepreneurs, artists who just did something because they felt connected with their place. They did something kind of wonderful and magical. And it was a really interesting sort of moment. And it turned out that touched a nerve, because it turns out everybody kind of wants to love their city, not just artists, not just entrepreneurs, but economic development folks, chambers of commerce, downtown associations, travel and tourism. So it's like, all right, this was actually really exciting. So that was sort of the main premise, and that's what I've written about and talked about over a series of 3 other books as well. And along comes 2020 and 2021, and I think, it's the 10-year anniversary of this book. It'd be kind of nice to go back and say, sort of, where are they now? But in an ordinary year, I probably would have said, that's a cool idea, but I would have been traveling and doing a lot of talks and a lot of work, and it would have just sort of sat on the back burner. But along comes COVID, and this opportunity arises. And so the idea for the Revisited was, let's go back and look at those stories, look at those people, sort of where are they now? What were the ideas that sort of I was right about? What held up? What was I very right about? What was I wrong about? And it was a really interesting process to sort of go back and reflect on that there. And I thought it was actually worth telling in a book form.
Can you tell us, without giving any spoiler alerts, some of the things that you were really right on and really wrong on?
Well, one of the things I think I was really right about, I talked about parks and green space as being something that we absolutely love about our places. And I think in 2011, I think it was one of the things, oh yeah, of course we love our parks. I think fast forward 10 years and post-COVID, we realized, man, we really do love our parks. And think about how important the park has become to us in the last couple of years. We live in St. Petersburg, and we have this marvelous park system here. The downtown park system is this emerald jewel that surrounds the bay. And imagine if, we didn't have that, during lockdowns, because the park was where you went. So I think we've ratcheted up our appreciation of parks and green space. I think I was very right about that. A couple of things I think I was pretty wrong about. One was I used the idea of independent bookstores as sort of an indicator, that a city was thinking, because I was looking for these metaphors for how we might model a relationship with our place, based off of personal relationships. Good interpersonal relationships, people talk. I love you for your mind. We talk to each other. So how was I a thinking relationship? And I thought, the presence of independent bookstores was a really good indicator of that a community, a neighborhood is thinking. And unfortunately, I said, in 2011, it seemed like the independent bookstore was going to go the way of the dinosaur. Mm-hmm. That's not the case, because what happened is the whole idea of buy local, of local pride, really found a niche in those bookstores. The number of independent bookstores has gone up since 2011, and I'm very happy to be proven wrong about that, here. So yeah, I was wrong about that, but I think I was right about that idea of that, that people want to love and connect with their place. And the bookstore became this sort of natural conduit for which they could do that. So yay for them.
Yeah, I think that we're probably pretty ready within the next couple of years for a pretty serious study on the use of public spaces to come out during COVID. And anecdotally, you know, being a part of the county park system, not necessarily, you know, managing the data or anything to that degree, but I could certainly see that people were just desperate for somewhere to go.
Absolutely.
And you know, we've got the ideas of, you know, the city beautiful and the county beautiful coming out of those ideas from the 1920s, and certainly we're very lucky to have the green spaces left in Pinellas County that we do. But you start reading about what that idea was back in the 1920s, and it could have been marvelous. Connected green spaces. I think we've done a fantastic job here, just because there's just not a lot of real estate to choose from. We are a finite piece of property.
Yes.
So, but we're doing the best that we can. And they certainly are important spaces.
Well, and I think what the upshot on that is that, you know, oftentimes when budgets get tight, budgets always cyclically do get tight. Unfortunately, the Parks Department is often one of the first places where they would look to, you know, cut the budget. I don't necessarily see that as the case in the future, because I think there is this newfound appreciation of how important parks, even passive parks, you know, actually are for people's overall physical, emotional, spiritual well-being. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we hope in the Parks Department here that you are right about that one.
Amen. Yeah.
So can you give us a brief history so that the people listening can kind of understand what happened? A brief history of post-war cities and how they were organized and what perhaps was lost.
Yeah. Well, post-war, post-World War II, you see a change in sort of the nature of cities. Cities were, at one point, there were a lot of very industrial cities. I mean, you still see, you know, remnants of that. If you go to Detroit or Chicago and things like that, you can still see the, you know, the slaughter yards and the train yards and the old car factories are still there. But that was the beginning of this shift out of cities, of that type of industry, that they needed more space, that cities became more residential. And unfortunately, they also became more segregated in that. And along comes the interstate highway system, which was an opportunity for infrastructure to be built, certainly, but it's also an opportunity to reshape neighborhoods and communities. And a lot of times it was done along very discriminatory and racial lines there. If you look at where highways were placed, they oftentimes cut right through the poorest neighborhoods and destroyed the fabric of those neighborhoods. So once those highways are built, along comes the suburbs, because you could now live, you know, outside the city there. And you have these suburban enclaves. Sometimes they eventually become gated, and it becomes this racially and economically segregated communities. And what we're trying to see now is how to undo some of that with better planning and better design, because cities, hopefully they reflect the best of our aspirations for all of us. You know, and I say that downtowns are incredibly important to the identity for people and for the place, because downtowns are the psychic centers of every city. So you need a vibrant, you know, exciting, inclusive downtown there. Because if you have a moribund downtown, I don't care how exciting you think the suburbs are, you don't really have something going on there. So downtowns are incredibly important in that. And I think what we're seeing is that there was this move post-war, there was this move away from downtowns. We realized, wait a minute, we've spread out. This is not exactly what we were looking for, especially, you know, in the 21st century. You've seen this, wait a minute, this idea of the city, this vibrant place where people and ideas and information and arts and culture, they all sort of happen in this really wonderful way. That's where we actually want to be. And we're trying to create more of that sort of thing, even in the suburban, outlying areas. We want that vibrancy that models what downtowns actually are.
Yeah, you know, and I think we see that very destruction of the fabric of a community in the hot button issue of the gas plant district right now here in St. Petersburg. So right where the Tropicana field is, and so that is a very contentious issue, definitely on par with those developments that are coming out of the post-war era, setting up highways, and which portion of the city can be used
Right.
to put up those highways. So yeah, this is not just a unique situation to
That
St. Petersburg or the
happens all
Tampa
over
Bay
the country.
area.
Happens
Yes,
all
it
over the
did.
country. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's
now we're trying to undo some of that. It's like, okay, how do we make some? We did, we recognize. Wait a minute, this was, this was an injustice that was done. And like, all right, how do we figure out how to move forward, and maybe try to rectify some of that, that past. Yeah.
Do you find that there is somewhat of a reverberation, because it had kind of refocused the trend to living downtown, where things were kind of crystallizing in a downtown space, to when COVID started, people really started moving out of those downtown spaces and into the hinterland.
Yeah, I think there was this narrative out there that's like, people are fleeing New York. It's like, okay, yes, in San Francisco. Well, I think COVID accelerated a lot of things. And there's always a group of people that are on their way out the door in cities like New York and San Francisco and whatnot. Part of it is price. Part of it is sort of the natural sort of demographic shift. As people get older and they look to have kids, cities are not necessarily are not designed well for families with children. They just aren't there. So the natural inclination is those people, are moving out and younger folks are moving in. Well, COVID certainly accelerated a lot of that. And I think what COVID also revealed is that despite how cool your apartment is or your condo is, you are highly, highly dependent, especially in those bigger cities, you're highly dependent upon the third space that is your city. And when that is closed off because of, of lockdown restrictions, you're looking around at this tiny box that you're living in New York going, this is hard.
Yeah.
I mean, yes. So I think there was this reaction. It's like, wow, maybe a yard would be kind of cool. Maybe I'd like to have a porch or, a single family home, maybe, close to downtown, but, so there was some of that. Absolutely. But at the same time, if the upshot of all of this is that places like New York and San Francisco get a little cheaper, get a little younger, because again, young people are always going to be interested in going to places where there is that sort of activity and that energy that's a good thing. Everyone will find a new seat in all this. And I think, New York and San Francisco and all those big cities, they'll be okay. They have other issues to deal with around that, but COVID simply accelerated some of that. And of course we ran with that particular narrative.
Yeah, I feel like we're seeing in this post modern era that those places that were built by the creative class, like Seattle and San Francisco, New York, have just been commodified in a way that the creative class can't handle financially being there anymore.
They were victims of their own success in many ways. I mean, they've priced out all but the highest earners within that creative class cohort that you're talking about. And the creative class is a concept that Richard Florida came up with. He's a professor. He's up in Toronto now. I've known Richard for almost 20 years now, as part of the group that actually helped bring him to Tampa Bay for the first time in like 2003. And what he talked about was creating spaces that would be attractive to these young, educated technology and creative workers, designers, programmers, all those folks. So you build economies around them. And that's exactly what places like Seattle and San Francisco and New York have largely done. But, when you start catering to that particular group, you're going to get this rise in pricing there. And that's what has really been the sticking point, especially for cities on the West Coast there that have this, that have Amazon and Facebook and Microsoft are all in their downtowns, and nobody else can afford to live there or rent there. So yeah, that's a problem.
So I love that. That's a great segue into our next question, which is how do we make cities more lovable, and why does it matter? I mean, we're talking about this creative class, and then at an intersection that is easier for us to say it's connected to Facebook or Amazon. It wasn't always that. It wasn't always that.
And it doesn't need to be. I love the fact you have, this is, for those of you who don't know, this is actually Jane Jacobs over here on the screen.
I had to give her a shout out.
That's right. Well, and what's interesting is she's holding her seminal book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. Came out in, I believe, 1961 there. So, wow, 50 years. 50 years. Okay. So, but Jane was not an urban planner. She was not an architect or anything like that. She was she would call herself, she was a housewife, and she was a citizen activist, and she was a storyteller. And basically what she did is she observed what made her neighborhood in New York City interesting to her and why that mattered. She talked about the ordinary street life, the day-to-day occurrence of just walking down this multifaceted sort of street that had different types of people and different types of uses. And it was this wonderful neighborhood there. And she wrote about that and why that was important. And it was important then. And so it's probably even more important now as more and more of us are now going back to cities. When we talk about, what makes a city lovable, it doesn't have to be like these giant projects. And in fact, it usually isn't the big projects. It's the small things, and Jane was very, astute in writing about that, in her observation of that it was this interplay of the daily theater that is sort of our city. And that has to do with watching people. Yes, big stadiums are great and tall buildings and all the mega architecture, that's interesting. But when it comes right down to it, most of us live in a neighborhood, and what we want is we want a little shade. We want a nice place to sit. We want a cool park. We want a place to walk our dog. We want to actually feel connected to our neighbors. And sometimes that's easier if, our neighbors are not, on the next, lot over, and they have their 2-car garage. We wave at them when they drive in, they wave at us when they drive out. There, and that's as far as it goes. No, when we actually can interact with each other and we have to connect on some level, that's when cities get interesting. And what we can do is more of that. Okay, so little things like, St. Petersburg, where I live. I love the fact that we have become a city of murals. Mm-hmm. And people say, well, okay, what's the big deal about that? It's like, well, because it's better than a blank wall. Right. It's better than a tagged wall, right? And even if you don't like the art, fine. At least as you walk past it, it has a different energy. It has a different feel to it than a blank or a tagged wall. You somehow, on some level, you go, this is better. And you do that, you walk around downtown St. Pete, you'll see 100 murals. That's 100 times when you're being reminded that this is better than a blank wall, okay? Or plants, right? Simply, good landscaping there. The planting of trees and flowers. There, it's not only good for the environment, of course, but it's actually just good for us that there's something about that. We have this, what's called a biophilic response, that we respond as human beings, we respond to other living things, especially plants and greenery. So more of that is just actually intrinsically good for us. So it doesn't have to be these big giant projects. I'm all for big giant projects. I think they're kind of cool. I mean, the St. Pete Pier is a great example of a very large, what I call a love note. It's a big, expensive love note. But, they don't all have to be the big, Mac Daddy sort of love notes. Sometimes they're the little ones. And in fact, it's the accumulation of lots and lots of those little ones that actually creates this great sense of place.
Yeah, I think about things like the intersection mandalas that people had been doing, yes. Where all you just need is some chalk and a bunch of people who want to do that. Yeah. And it makes almost akin to the mural. The amount of effort put yes. into something like that shows love. It shows mm-hmm. love. It shows that the space is loved. It's actually the opposite of the broken window effect.
Yes, because that's a very good example there for a number of reasons. One is it requires, hey, you and I and our friends, we have to actually go out and do that. We can't just sit back and complain, there's nothing to do in this city, or somebody should really do something about that. No, we actually did it. So there's that. There's the making of it, that we roll up our sleeves and we get a little dirty. Great. We've created something visually interesting. It's like, okay, and even if it doesn't last, in fact, the fact that it doesn't last is probably maybe even more important. It's like, hey, did you see that intersection that we did last week? No, I missed it. It's like, don't worry, we'll do it again. There. And here's the other thing. There's this weird natural traffic calming effect of an intersection mandala or something that's done there. We all lament that, there's too many cars or they're going too fast or all this other stuff, right? Because we feel that, our cities have been designed for cars. And in fact, there's evidence that suggests that really is more the case sometimes than for people. Well, if the intersection doesn't look quite like a normal intersection because we've painted it, we've chalked it or something like that, there's this natural inclination that the cars slow down. And that's good for the neighborhood. That's good for us. So yeah, there's a lot of things in that simple little project that you just described that if you start to unpack it, go, oh, that's kind of cool. And then if we start doing more and more of that, we create this virtuous cycle, where good things compound upon good things, and people are going to say, hey, all of a sudden, hey, have you been to Pinellas County lately? It's like, yeah, something going on.
Yeah, it's inspirational too, because I'll have to say the murals in downtown St. Pete are what attracted me to want to move here. And it certainly is perhaps an unofficial megaphone saying, we love artists, come here. There's room for other projects. So I love that. It's not only art for art's sake, but it's explaining to newcomers coming to St. Petersburg, we're open to the arts. We love the arts. We want them here.
The murals are what I call a visible and persistent reminder of something, right? St. Pete declared itself a city of the arts 10, 15 years ago, right? Okay, and then how'd they pay that off? Well, initially they paid it off by moving the Dali Museum closer to downtown, having the Chihuly and other museums. Like, okay, that's part of that, because again, museum, even if you don't go into it, it is a visible and persistent reminder. It's like, hey, there's art in there. But on a street level basis, on a day-to-day basis, the fact that the murals are there, that I think even takes to a whole other level. And again, you don't have to look at the mural. You don't have to even consciously register it. On some subconscious level, it's like, there's art there. Yeah. That means there's art. There's artists about. Oh my God, where are they? Yeah.
Yeah, whenever there's artists, things are they're bound to be interesting, right?
Yeah. And that's the thing, is like, you walk down the street, it's like, oh, that mural wasn't there before. It's like, hey, that's kind of cool. Or maybe that's like, oh, that's been there for years. Like, I never walked this way before. It's like, okay, good for you.
There's a new one I see every time. Every time I turn a different corner, I'm like, another mural.
That's right.
So besides our mural project in downtown St. Pete, are there other examples of groups or movements that are striving to make St. Petersburg more lovable right now that you can think of off the top of your head?
Sure. Well, one of them is actually a friend of mine is very active in it. It's called the Yimbys. There's that NIMBY, not in my backyard sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, this group is Yimbys. They're trying to get people to say yes to things, especially like changes in zoning that may on the surface seem like it might be against their immediate economic interest to do so, but in the long run, it will actually be good for them, good for the city, good for the community there. And a lot of that is like changing in sort of the housing dynamic in sort of places like the old Northeast, where you have these legacy sort of small apartments and these accessory dwellings there, but every time one of them goes, the people basically want to buy those up and get rid of them and turn it into another single family home there. And I think that's wrong. We have this dynamic, this opportunity to create a richer fabric of housing options. And why not put it in really desirable places there in like in the old Northeast? It's actually already sort of built for that. And it's not like we're going to put up crap in there. You're going to put up good stuff. I just think that, they're getting people to, the fears like, I'm worried about, a giant apartment building going into my neighborhood there. It's like, that's not going to happen. It's like, we're going to do 6, 8 apartments or something like that. There's already 4 of them here. It's like, let's do them better. So the YIMBY group is actually trying to get people to, say yes to things that so many people want to reflexively say no to, things like, dog parks or a skate park. So again, stuff like that there. And, and I love what's happening, in places like the Warehouse Arts District there that continues to grow, that you still see new and exciting businesses and arts groups coming in and just doing some really cool stuff. And then stuff that's happening, on the South Side. I know, there's the whole, the group that's working with the Deuces, trying to, bring, that particular area, more vibrancy back to there, and using some historical antecedents, they're trying to bring back the legacy of when that was a really vibrant, African-American sort of shopping district, sort of a downtown Main Street, as it were. And then, of course, the stuff that ultimately what's going to happen with the Trop. I think that's one of the major ones. We're not going to see any movement on that for, I think, a little while, but it's out there and it's looming there. But Yeah, there's so much going on in St. Petersburg. I can't keep up with it, to tell you the truth. Every time I turn around, it's like, wow, oh, there's a new development going on there. That's cool. You know, or this is changing, this is happening. But yeah, it's an exciting time to be here. I make the argument. I will say this. I travel, you know, all right, you know, I historically have traveled all over the country. Not so much in the last year and a half, but I tell people, says, I think St. Petersburg is the best city in Florida. And I make the argument, you know, it truly is. And Pinellas County has done really, really well as a whole also. We should be very proud of ourselves. You know, we've come through kind of extraordinary time and the city shined. You know, all of our cities actually shined. You know, the cities didn't have the luxury of being partisan or playing, you know, cute with a lot of stuff. It's like cities had to get stuff done. They had to pick up the trash and make sure police and fire service were still active. And hopefully we, as the residents of places, go, you know what, our city came through for us. St. Petersburg, Largo, Clearwater, I don't care where you're from, your city delivered for you. And hope you remember that.
And also it's really exciting too to understand and note that those unincorporated portions of Pinellas County have been designated as CRAs, or community redevelopment areas. So the St. Petersburg's obviously got a lot of really great things going on, but as a county with about 27 different municipalities and then pockets of unincorporated, you kind of don't know when it stops and another smaller municipality starts.
Exactly.
You're on unincorporated Pinellas County. So I got to give a shout out to our commissioners for organizing those CRAs, because they're doing really great things in those areas as well.
I mean, think about it. On a human level, it's like we don't know where. It's like maybe you're driving, you see now entering Kenneth City, now entering Largo, whatever. But for the most part, it's all kind of this, as Rick Baker would have said, it's kind of this seamless city. It's like, you know, we're a dense county. You know, where does St. Petersburg end, Largo begin, Clearwater? You know, you don't know. And honestly, other than, you know, maybe a few groups of people who it actually matters to, it's like as people who live here, I don't care if the restaurant is there. I don't care if where the office is. It's like, this is all just part of my community. So the lines are pretty arbitrary for us as residents. I want to see the community as a whole get better, more lovable, more interesting. And I don't care, you know, if it's across whatever arbitrary border you happen to set up, that doesn't matter to me. I know it matters to some because, you know, budgets and politics and things like that. But on a human level, it doesn't really matter, you know, where the good stuff is. It's if it's good enough, I'm going to come find it. Hopefully that's the case.
I love that. Yeah, same here. And, you know, I hope that they continue, especially thinking back to our last Halloween, just recently down in St. Petersburg on Central Avenue, deciding to do a complete street and getting rid of the cars and letting people just wander.
And that was a big, big hit.
Yes.
Yes.
So
and I hope it sets an interesting precedent. People going, oh, interesting. And you know what's funny is a lot of the business owners there they were upset. They were worried that this was going to be bad. So far from the truth there. It's like they go, wow, this was awesome. Let's do this again. Yeah. And maybe now we will find other opportunities, not just Halloween. It's like, okay, could we do that again? What other streets could we shut down? Maybe it's like, hey, let's do this. Let's try that. It would be a very good thing, because again, we tend to think that cities have to be all about the cars. Like, oh, if the cars can't get through, the city will come to a grinding halt. It's like, nope, if it's good enough, if there's something interesting going on, we will find a way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. I am an avid enthusiast for the biking, commuting via bike. If I didn't live in South St. Pete and had to come up to Largo, I would totally do it. But we're getting there as an
electric bike. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go.
I'm not sure I'd want to do that.
It's either that or a Peloton.
Yeah. Well, you know, 2 birds, 1 stone there. You get to get to work and get in your workout. It's like time, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It can't fail.
Well,
thank you so much, Peter. This has been incredibly fascinating. Is there anything else you would like to add and tell everyone where they can find your book?
Well, my book is locally available at Tombolo Books. I was talking about those good independent bookstores. There's one, in fact, next week. I don't know when this is going out, but next Monday, the 21st, I think.
22nd.
22nd. I'm doing a book talk there. And of course, all my books are available there, but I'm also available on Amazon books and ebooks there as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Peter. We really had a lot of fun talking with you, and the book is amazing. Go out and get Peter's book. You'll learn a lot on how to make your city a little bit more lovable. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Monica. Take care.
You too.
Yay.
Yay.
Okay.
Well,
Very
that
good.
was a lot of fun. Thanks, Peter.
Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah, thanks for the plug there at the end. Yeah, we'll. Are you able to come out on Monday or?
I'm gonna try to, yeah, because I love Tombolo.
Yeah.
Any reason to go to Tombolo is a good reason.
Yeah. They are really one of they've become, like I said, a real gem. And I'd like to tell that story a little bit more in depth about, sort of how that intense local love has now found a natural sort of home in not only the independent bookstores, but also the local breweries. That they're like this.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So the breweries are becoming, and just like taking one example, Green Bench.
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen so many families at a bar in all my life.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Isn't that funny?
It is. It's really strange.
Because it's not your typical. It's not a bar the way we think of bars. When we were growing up as kids, or even when you're in college or whatever. No, it's this really amazing third space that happens to serve beer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there is this sort of changing dynamic around that. But certainly I've written about that. The craft beer scene is one of those highly local, artisanal, entrepreneurial things that really is good for local identity and local love. So yeah,
absolutely. My husband happens to be the head brewer at Big Storm, so I am
there you go,
right in the world of breweries and how they operate and why people love going to them. And they certainly, the mission of the independent craft brewery has, over the last 20 years that I've watched it, the mission has completely changed, where it is definitely more drinking to like get drunk and more on what other entertainment can we provide to them, and a couple of really good beers and some food trucks, and there you go. Yeah.
And think about the one funny thing about the local beer thing. Think about how many stories have now come out because of the way a beer is named. It's like, it's named after such and such or this. Well, why is it that? It's like, oh, funny story. And then now you're learning a little bit of local history about your particular community. It's like, oh, and I learned it from a can of beer. It's like, there you go.
Well, you could definitely learn worse things from a can of beer.
Yes.
And I truly love that we have introduced to people the idea, for instance, going back to Green Bench, of what is the past and maybe not so wonderful history of the Green Bench.
Yes, that it is. Yeah, it's a complicated image. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So the fact that they have taken that word, that combination of words, and they've rebranded it, they've reorganized it to be something positive for the community is a story in and of itself right there.
Yeah, very true. Excellent.
Well, cool. Well, thanks so much, Peter. I hope to see you on Monday.
Okay.
And I'm going to try and edit this. I don't think there's much to edit except for the intro part, which is kind of our where we make sure everything's working and audio is working. And I'll try to get it out today so that I'll send it to Amy, I'll send it to you, and then you can blast it off to whoever you want to.
Happily. Yeah. Awesome.
Excellent.
Monica.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Have a good weekend.
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.